Congressman Representative Brooklynite Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York. He plans to throw his hat in for the fourth highest role in the House, Democratic Caucus Chair. Good evening, Congressman.
Good to see you, Rev.
Let me ask you before I go to the Democratic fights in terms of Speaker and others. What do you think? And you know we had a large discussion about that 2 days in Washington this week with National Action Network's conference. What do you think the Democratic priorities ought to be legislatively and policy-wise?
Well, I think help to lay out and help to shape, Rev, in Washington. When we made our closing argument to the American people, we indicated that we were going to fight for the people, not for the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected millionaires and billionaires, special interests and lobbyists. We're going to fight for working families, middle-class folks, senior citizens, the poor, the sick, the afflicted, veterans, and people from all across the country, and do that by focusing on lowering health care costs, increasing pay for everyday Americans through a real infrastructure plan, and cleaning up corruption in Washington, D.C., and making sure that democracy works for everyday Americans, including by ending the era of voter suppression.
Now, when you go to voter suppression, and our appeal in Washington was to both parties, it wasn't a Democratic meeting, but I did ask you specifically about the Democrats. When you go to voter suppression, the Section 5, which protected the states that had a pattern of discrimination from being able to move in any way changing their voting laws and regulations without pre-clearance, is that something now the Congress ought to and will pick up to put a map back in? Because the Supreme Court didn't rule out the Voting Rights Act. It took out the map. And the Congress can put a map back in and say, okay, this is the new map for 2018 going forward.
That's absolutely correct. The Supreme Court decision in 2013 in Shelby County versus Holder was wrongly decided, in my view, but it did leave a pathway for Congress to repair what they concluded was a flaw related to Section 5 in the Voting Rights Act. But Congress, under Republican leadership, has failed to do its job. John Lewis and Terry Sewell and Jim Clyburn and Cedric Richmond and others are leading the charge on the Voting Rights Act fix. That will be one of the first pieces of legislation, I believe, hits the floor of the Democratic-controlled House of Representatives.
Now, when we look at the first step legislation that has been proposed in terms of criminal justice, even President Trump came out and supported it this week, but it really started in the House, and you were one of those that started that. Now it goes into the Senate. Cory Booker and others have signed on. Some of us in the civil rights community had questions because we didn't think it would far enough. There's been things added to it now that will put people in a position to work and get out of jail for nonviolent crimes. Where is the bill now? And how close do you think we are to seeing it come about? Because there are people sitting in jail now that many of us feel were overly sentenced in terms of when you deal with the crime and the penalty.
That's absolutely correct. You know, as you have articulated year after year, we've got a mass incarceration epidemic in this country where we incarcerate far more people than any other country in the world. And when the failed war on drugs was first launched by Nixon in 1971, there were less than 350,000 people incarcerated in this country. Today, more than 2.2 million disproportionately black, Latino, nonviolent drug offenders. And so the First Step Act will do two things. One, it would deal with prison reform, making sure that currently incarcerated individuals have the vocational training, the education, the resources, the rehabilitation to successfully transition back into society, become productive citizens, and in the process reduce recidivism and save taxpayer dollars. The sentencing reform aspects of the bill, which weren't in the original House version, but we laid a foundation for negotiation in the Senate, and as you and others have pushed for, will now include rolling back some of the failed war on drug, tough on crime, unnecessary punitive sentencing, as well as making the crack cocaine disparity as it relates to powder cocaine and the fix that took place in 2010 under Barack Obama retroactive,
right,
so that thousands of people who are currently incarcerated will receive the relief that they deserve and could be returned to society.
That was a big concern. Let me ask you, as the Democrats take the House, are you supporting Nancy Pelosi's reelection? You're in the next generation. I know you from Brooklyn. You grew up. In fact, you were part of the National Action Network run-up. And are you part of the new generation that is against her or that is going to support her? And you're running yourself. Are you saying you represent the new generation if you are elected? Barbara Lee is running, who was on my colleague Joy Reid's this morning. Why are you a better alternative?
Well, I support Leader Pelosi, and I believe she'll be the next speaker. And in terms of the caucus chair race, this is an opportunity for us to begin the process of a new generation of members of the House of Representatives to emerge. I have nothing but the greatest degree of respect for Barbara Lee. It's a friendly contest of ideas. The caucus is going to have to decide who is best positioned to lead or participate in leading House Democrats forward into the future. I'm of the view that we have to make sure that we maintain our legislative operational unity, continue our message discipline. I was proud to be part of the effort to develop the closing argument that we made to the American people to seize the House. We need to continue to message in a clear, concise, and compelling way in order to be able to be successful over the next 2 years when we know Donald Trump is going to try to do everything he can to demonize the House majority.
All right, I'm going to have to leave it there. Thank you, Congressman.